Today we are looking at a case from the very end of the 19th century, so sit back as we go to Australia. The Murphy family operated a farm about 8 miles from the township of Gatton and roughly 61 miles west of Brisbane, the capital of what was then the colony of Queensland. Gatton itself was small, with a population of around 500, but it stood at an important point on the route linking Brisbane with the Darling Downs, one of the most productive agricultural districts in Queensland, known for its extensive farms and grazing lands that supplied grain, cattle and wool to markets in Brisbane and beyond. As a result, there was a steady flow of people, livestock and goods that passed through the town on their way between the coast and the inland districts. With 2 significant bridges and a railway line passing through it, Gatton was developing quickly as a service centre for the surrounding area. Daniel Murphy and his wife Mary had established their farm there many years earlier. Daniel had emigrated from Ireland and had worked on the construction of the railway between Ipswich and Toowoomba, with the first section of the line between Ipswich and Biggie's Camp, which is now called Grantchester, opening on the 31st of July 1865. This railway was gradually extended westwards, going up the main range to Toowoomba. While working in Queensland, Daniel met Mary, who had also emigrated from Ireland. They married in 1866, the year before the line was completed. When the railway work ended, Daniel turned to farming. Through their hard work, they built up a holding of about 300 acres, where they raised livestock and grew crops. Their home was a modest 5-bedroom cottage, and over the following years Mary gave birth to 10 children: Polly, William, Michael, Nora, Patrick, Daniel, Jeremiah, Ellen, John and Catherine. By the late 1890s, several of the older children had already left home to seek employment elsewhere, a common step for young men and women in rural Queensland, where men often found work on farms, railways, or road building, and young women frequently entered domestic service or other household employments. Michael Murphy was employed at a government experimental farm near Westbrook, while his brother Daniel had joined the police and was serving as a constable in Brisbane. Michael returned to the farm during the Christmas holidays of 1898, when many people who had been working away from home came back to spend the season with their families. The 26th of December was a lively occasion in rural Queensland, when races, sports and social gatherings drew people from miles around. That afternoon, Michael and his younger sister Ellen attended the Mount Sylvia horse races at nearby Caffey. Later that evening, he borrowed a horse and cart from his brother-in-law, William McNeil, and prepared to drive into Gatton with his sisters Ellen and Nora. The three had set out intending to attend a dance that was being held at the local Gatton Hall, something that was quite common in country districts, particularly for the younger and unmarried residents, who had few opportunities for recreation or company. Michael, Ellen and Nora reached the town at about 9 o'clock, only to discover that the dance had been cancelled, as there had not been enough interest from the men in the area. Following this, Michael and his 2 sisters decided to stay in Gatton for a while, as they wanted to speak to their friends, but at about 10 p.m, they set off for their journey back to their parents' property. However, they never arrived. The following morning, the family realised that Michael, Ellen and Nora had not returned, and concerned about their absence, Mrs. Murphy asked her son-in-law William McNeil to ride into Gatton and look for them. Michael had taken Mr. McNeil's horse and cart, which possessed a distinctive feature. One of its wheels wobbled slightly, leaving a recognisable track in the road. William took a horse, and while riding along the Tent Hill Road towards Gatton, he noticed the familiar marks of his wagon. However, strangely, the tracks led away from the road, through a slip rail, and continued across rough ground. He followed them along a path and through dense scrub for about 3/4 of a mile, until he eventually came upon a terrible sight. The bodies of Michael, Nora and Ellen Murphy lay in a paddock about 1.2 miles from Gatton. Michael and Ellen's bodies lay back to back at the foot of a large gum tree, less than 2 feet apart, while Nora lay a few yards away. She had been placed upon a rug that had been carefully spread on the ground. The 3 had been arranged in a triangular pattern, and as William McNeil inspected the scene more closely, he saw that the horse too had been shot and lay dead nearby. Now in a state of panic, he rode into Gatton to raise the alarm. Strangely, however, before going to the police station, he stopped at the Brian Boru Hotel, where he told those inside what he had discovered in the paddock outside the town. He then informed Acting Sergeant William Arrell, who was in charge of the Gatton police station. Sergeant Harrell went to the site, but the news had already spread rapidly, and before he arrived, as many as 40 people had gathered there to try and see for themselves what had happened. Their unwanted presence, however, destroyed any potential evidence there may have been. Sergeant Harrell inspected the site, but for some reason, he only remained there for about half an hour. During that time, he made no notes, asked no questions of the people who had been gathered, and took no steps to organise or control the scene. He asked the magistrate, Mr. Thomas Wilson, and the local bootmaker, Mr. William Devitt, if they would remain behind to watch over the area while he attended to sending telegrams. Neither man, however, was able to keep the growing number of onlookers back, and people continued to move about the paddock, further disturbing the ground and whatever evidence might still have been there. On his return to Gatton, the sergeant sent a telegram to the Commissioner of Police in Brisbane. The message reached police headquarters at 12:52 p.m, but because the day was a public holiday, the message was not opened until 9 o'clock the following morning. The bodies were eventually taken back into Gatton, placed in a hotel, and laid out for examination. The government medical officer arrived from Ipswich and carried out a brief inspection. Even with his limited examination, it was clear to him that all 3 victims had died violently. Both women had their hands bound behind their backs with handkerchiefs, and it appeared that Michael's hands may also have been tied at some stage, although they were untied when his body was first examined. In the course of the inquiry, Michael's purse was found close by, but it was empty, despite the fact that he had gone out that night with 15 shillings on his person. Michael had been shot on the right side of the head and also struck with a blunt instrument. Ellen's skull had been fractured by 2 heavy blows to the left side of her head, and Nora had suffered even more severe injuries. Her skull had been shattered by a blow, and a harness strap had been tightened around her neck until she was strangled. From the position in which Michael and Ellen were found, it appeared that they had been sitting upright, back to back, when they were attacked. Indications suggested that a whip with a brass-mounted handle had been used during the assaults, although despite an extensive search, the police were unable to find this, or anything that may have been used to inflict such injuries. Almost from the beginning, uncertainty began to surround the handling of the case, and there was much confusion about the actions taken at the scene and in the hours that followed the discovery of the 3 bodies. When Michael's body was removed, the purse strap had been placed between his hands, and the empty purse was found in one of them. Yet when police questioned those who had first seen the body where it lay, their accounts did not agree on whether these items had originally been arranged in that way. Some witnesses claimed that an onlooker had interfered with the body in order to search the purse. On the 28th of December, police arrived from Brisbane with native Australian trackers, and a wide search of the surrounding district began. Farm workers and labourers within 50 miles were questioned as part of an effort to trace any suspicious movements. Yet even as the investigation gathered pace, further complications began to emerge, particularly in relation to the medical examinations and the burial of the victims. Mr. Wiggins, a Justice of the Peace, had authorised the burials on the understanding that a proper post-mortem examination had already been carried out. His account was supported by Police Inspector Percy Galbraith, who stated that Dr. Van Losberg had told him that he had completed his examination and had observed what appeared to be a bullet wound, although he had been unable to locate the bullet. Dr. Van Losberg, however, disputed this. He maintained that he had not performed full autopsies, as he was suffering from blood poisoning at the time, and that he had advised the bodies should not be buried until he had recovered sufficiently to conduct a proper examination. Despite the mix-up, it was agreed that the bodies should be exhumed, so a post-mortem could be completed. This second post-mortem was able to confirm that Michael had been shot in the head and then struck with a blunt instrument that had partially concealed the bullet wound, and the bullet was then recovered from his skull. The issues with the investigation drew sharp criticism from both the authorities and the press. As details of the handling of the scene and the confusion over the medical examination became more widely known, questions were raised about the conduct of those responsible. Newspapers began to highlight the apparent failures, pointing to the lack of control at the crime scene, the conflicting accounts given by officials, and the premature burial of the bodies before proper post-mortems had been completed. Officials too expressed concern, and the case came to be seen as an example of serious shortcomings in police procedure. The combination of lost evidence, uncertain testimony, and the confusion with the administration only deepened public unease and added to the growing sense that vital opportunities to uncover the truth had been missed. On the 3rd of January 1899, the Queensland government offered a reward of £1,000 for information leading to the arrest and conviction of those responsible. Suspicion fell upon various individuals, including labourers and even members of the Murphy family. One man who attracted attention was Thomas Day, a butcher who lived in a hut about 900 feet from the place where the bodies had been found. Several people reported seeing him walking along the road on earlier nights in the area where the Murphy siblings had travelled, and one witness later claimed to have seen him washing blood from his clothes a few days after the crime. Reports of possible suspects flooded in, along with the inevitable police promises of an early arrest. Clairvoyants also offered their own versions. One who held a séance at a hotel in Brisbane claimed 4 men were responsible, saying that they were evil-looking men and from respectable families who had lived near Gatton. She claimed their hideout was west of Toowoomba, in hilly, isolated country, where they were forced to light fires in caves. She also said that the police were on the wrong track and that Michael Murphy had been killed first, and that following this, attempts had been made to gag the women, who had struggled fiercely. On the 10th of January 1899, the clairvoyant confidently predicted that the murderers would soon be arrested, although nothing came of it. Amid the flood of speculation, the police also received statements from more credible witnesses, whose accounts, though often limited, were treated with greater seriousness. These included reports from people who had seen the Murphy party during the evening, or who had noticed unusual movements along the road leading to and from Gatton. Yet even these more reliable observations failed to form a clear, consistent picture of what exactly had taken place. The more the press reported the crime, the more the police were inundated with reports. There were some people who claimed to have overheard a death plot on Christmas Eve, and others reported threats against the elder girl and encounters with suspicious men along the road. One story circulated that Nora had not attended the races at all, another that a young man had been with the Murphy party earlier and had met them again later. A domestic worker reported hearing gunshots and a woman screaming, "Oh father, save me." There was much conversation about how many people may have been involved in the murders, but the most favourable was the one-man theory. Much had been written about the man seen at the slip rails near Moran's paddock on the 26th of December. Mr. Arthur Brooking, who was aged 77, said he passed the slip rails at about 7:45 in the evening and noticed a man standing there. He said that soon afterwards he heard a gunshot that came from the direction of the hill. About 45 minutes later, a woman named Mrs. Carroll passed the same spot. She said that she had seen the 3 young Murphys on the road towards Gatton and had also seen a man at the rails. Authorities noted that if the man had still been there at the time, the Murphys themselves must have passed him while travelling into Gatton. Mrs. Carroll's son, named John, also reported seeing the stranger and said that he had been wearing a blue shirt and coat. A woman named Miss Florrie Lowe told officers that she reached the slip rails at 9:15 p.m. and saw a man walking towards her. She said that she became quite frightened, but that fortunately Mr. Michael Donahue and Mr. Thomas Drew passed by, and she was able to go on her way. When investigators spoke to Mr. Drew, he told them that at some time after 9 o'clock, he had heard a shot and seen a sudden movement near the slip rails, and a few moments earlier had noticed a man standing nearby. He said that when he passed the man, he called out "good night," but the man did not reply. Mr. Donahue confirmed this story and added that not long afterwards, they saw Michael, Nora and Ellen Murphy on the road and exchanged greetings with them as they continued their journey. Altogether, 6 witnesses came forward and stated that they had seen a man on the slip rails between about 7:45 and 9:15 p.m, which meant that he must have been there for a considerable period of time. Their descriptions varied slightly, but the consistency in their testimonies suggested that the same individual had been hanging around the area. However, one puzzling detail remained. Acting Sergeant William Arrell had apparently passed the same spot during that time, yet he reported seeing no one at all. If the man had truly remained there for so long, he must have also been seen by the Murphys as they travelled into Gatton, and possibly when they returned later that night. People wondered who he was and why he had stayed around the area for so long. Had he witnessed something of importance, or was he more directly concerned with what followed? As these questions continued to circulate, the uncertainty surrounding this unknown man only deepened the mystery, with no clear answers emerging, despite the number of witnesses who had placed him there. Amid the growing speculation, there were those who called for sympathy towards the Murphy family. In the weeks following the murders, they had been forced to endure not only the loss, but also the strain of the investigation itself. Throughout the inquiry there were suggestions, sometimes suggestions that were openly expressed, that members of the family might have known more about the crime than they were willing to reveal. Such suspicions place a family in an impossible position. If there was any truth in the suggestion, then they were living under the shadow of a terrible dilemma. If it was untrue, they were left to bear the added burden of suspicion during their time of grief. But in either case, the ordeal they faced only deepened the sorrow that surrounding the murders and the unanswered questions that followed. Despite the many leads that were put forward, nothing came of them. Reports were investigated, witnesses were questioned, and suspects were considered, but no clear line of inquiry led to an arrest. Over time, attention moved away from the Gatton case, and the police were gradually drawn on other crimes. As the months passed, the investigation lost momentum, and the hope of a resolution grew more distant. A constable later suggested that the killing of the three Murphy siblings might also have been connected to another murder that had taken place in Oxley, where a 15-year-old boy named Alfred Stephen Hill had been shot, along with his pony. It was not until 1906 that a new lead emerged. A revolver with 4 spent chambers, the same number of shots believed to have been fired in both the Oxley and the Gatton killings, was discovered near the butcher's shop where Thomas Day had once worked. He had been questioned about the murders in December 1898, and soon after had left the area and enlisted in the army, but deserted in May 1899. Despite the scale of the investigation and years of speculation, the person or persons responsible for the deaths of Michael, Nora and Ellen Murphy were never identified. In 1962, 64 years after the murders, a woman spoke to the Queensland police, telling them of a flashback from her childhood. She said that she remembered her father mentioning a young man who had worked on their property as a labourer, who was suspected by some to have committed the 1898 murders in Gatton. She said that the man had lived as a recluse, camping in the bush, and had always behaved strangely. She added that whenever the murders were mentioned, he would start to cry. However, when investigators looked into the claim, they found no record or memory of the man mentioned by the woman, and concluded that he was probably a drifter who had left Gatton a few days after the murders, and had been interviewed by the police at the time, but was cleared of suspicion. Despite the scale of the investigation and the many leads pursued, no one was ever brought to justice for the murders. The deaths of Michael, Nora and Ellen Murphy remain one of Queensland's and Australia's most enduring and troubled unsolved cases.
Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I hope to see you all again in the next brief case.